Hello and welcome to the Book Club Review. I'm Kate.
I'm Laura.
And this is the podcast about book clubs and the books that get you talking. Every episode, we sit down to chat about the book read most recently by one of our book clubs. What did we make of it? Did it spark debate? And whether we loved it or loathed it, the big question is always, was it a great book club book?
Today we're talking about Call Me By Your Name by André Aciman. First published in 2006, it's gained many loyal admirers in the intervening years, including my friend Phil, who's joining us today as our special guest. So, Proustian meditation on time, desire and regret, or applauding an overly frank beach read? You'll have to keep listening to find out.
For our regular interview, I spoke with Kay Dunbar, director of the Ways with Words literary festivals in Dartington, Southwold and the Lake District. She's been running her book club for 20 years.
I quite like them to be more detailed and more fierce. And I suppose the best discussions we've had have been the ones where people have disagreed.
And we round all that off with some recommendations for your next book club read, inspired this time by Call Me By Your Name. Hi, Kate.
Hi Laura, welcome to the shed on a dark and rainy Wednesday night, and I've tidied, brushed it up a bit because we've got a guest, special guest, Phil.
Hi, Phil.
Hi, Kate and Laura.
And so, I don't know you, but Laura does. How do you know each other?
We know each other through a mutual friend who has a habit of inviting people over for great parties. So I guess I met Phil maybe last spring, but every time that we've run into each other, he and Teresa have been raving about Call Me By Your Name.
Who's Teresa?
Our mutual friend.
Our mutual friend. And I think the last time maybe we were talking about it, my husband was there and he has this new habit of buying me books that people recommend to me, which is just amazing. I don't know how this has happened. So he ordered it for me and then I managed to persuade my book club that it would be a great book club book.
So I actually read this book right when it came out in 2006, and I've been pushing it on friends ever since. André Aciman I was familiar with because he wrote Out of Egypt. He's this Egyptian Jewish family where they had to leave Egypt under Nasser in the 50s. And he's a really beautiful writer. And he happened, and maybe still does, to teach at Columbia, which is where I was in 2006. So I actually went to one of his launch readings of this, which was a bit weird because he is married with kids and he had his 16-year-old son in the audience when he read the sex scene. Which, as you both know, it's quite a steamy book. I just thought this was a brilliant dissection of desire and its aftermath.
Well, let me just sum it up by reading that.
Sorry.
Go from a helpful way just to cut to the chase of what it's actually about. During a restless summer on the Italian Riviera, a powerful romance blooms between 17-year-old Elio and his father's houseguest, Olivia. Unrelenting currents of obsession and fear, fascination and desire threaten to overwhelm the lovers, who at first feign indifference to the charge between them. What grows from the depths of their souls is a romance of scarcely 6 weeks' duration, and an experience that marks them for a lifetime. For what the two discover on the Riviera and during a sultry evening in Rome is the one thing they both already fear they may never truly find again: total intimacy.
Oh my, yes. It is steamy. I agree. The first third is proper steamy.
I don't know about steamy. I thought it was detailed rather than steamy.
Well, and I can tell you, it was a great book club book because everyone had really different views on different things. And so there's great debate. One of the first observations, because I was like, it's super steamy, right? And someone else was like, what are you talking about? She's like, it's just teenage ramblings, you know, but it's just a teenage boy feeling horny. And I'm like, no, you've missed the point. No, I didn't say that. But I was like, what do you mean? You know, there's so much more there. But you can read it that way too.
Yeah.
You know, it just depends how you kind of come at it.
Okay, well, before we get into it too much, let's just hear a reading and get a sense of the tone and the language.
The fear never went away. I woke up to it, watched it turn to joy when I heard him shower in the morning, and knew he'd be downstairs with us for coffee, only to watch it curdle when, rather than have coffee, he would dash through the house and right away set to work in the garden. By noon, the agony of waiting to hear him say anything to me was more than I could bear. I knew that the sofa awaited me in an hour or so. It made me hate myself for feeling so hapless, so thoroughly invisible, so smitten, so callow. Just say something. Just touch me, Oliver. Look at me long enough and watch the tears well in my eyes. Knock at my door at night and and see if I haven't already left it ajar for you. Walk inside. There's always room in my bed.
So I think it would be fair to say that this kind of thing goes on at some length. I mean, when I was reading it, I very much had a sense of, come on, when are we going to get to the point? There's an awful lot of, stolen glances, misdirected looks. He looks up, the other guy looks down, and you're like, oh, come on.
Are you too pragmatic for this, do you think?
Or maybe just impatient.
When I was younger, I could get so smitten and just obsess over things in my head. So I read this and could be like, oh my God, it's so embarrassing. But it just feels like the be all end all when you're young,
Yeah.
or when you're just unclear whether or not you have connection. And of course, this is the 1980s, which is only firmly established, I think, maybe a third of the way through. So then there's this other layer. It's not just that he's infatuated at a distance and he can't be kind of prompted to act. It's that there's this barrier for, a sexual relationship and romance between two men, especially probably in Italy, because there's still, as I understand it, quite a lot of prejudice about, being out in Italy.
And also, he's quite young, the protagonist. Do we actually know exactly how old
17.
he is? He's 17.
We know that from the beginning.
He's
I think.
17.
So he's no longer a child, but he's very much on the cusp of...
Yeah, and Oliver's 24. And so we had quite a long discussion in my book club about whether Oliver had taken advantage of Elio. And actually it became quite emotional for some people, because there's a sense, you go on a roller coaster with Elio. His emotions are changing, honestly, as you say, every half hour. There's moments where he feels shame. And for me, that was maybe wrapped up in his feelings of identity. What does this mean? I'm attracted to this man. Is my life over, almost? Whereas other people read the shame as Elio having been taken advantage of.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I wondered, what do you...
No,
what do
I
you
mean,
think?
I've just never had that reading. There's been a lot of discussion because of the movie. In the movie, it's different because of the age range is more extreme.
Oh, is it? Oh,
But in the
they
book,
look
I just never even thought about the morality or the ethics or at all of it. Elio is very much the aggressor in this book, for the pursuit at least.
Yeah.
Well, and interestingly, the whole thing takes place in the house of Elio's parents, who are quite present as characters. They're often sort of in and out of rooms. They're very much a part of the story. And there's a really lovely aspect to it, which is that they're sort of knowing and not encouraging precisely, but certainly it seems like a very enlightened
Family.
approach to parenting. They, very understanding and,
But it's never, except towards the end, it's clear that Elio's father is all right.
Yeah,
With the fact that
he books them the hotel room, doesn't he? That they're going to share together for their steamy 3 nights in Rome.
I know.
And then it's made even more clear than that, actually, when Elio returns after things have come to an end, and he has a much more direct conversation with his son, where it's clear that actually he's fully aware of everything and isn't particularly troubled by any of it.
No. Which some people in my book group felt was unrealistic for that time and place. And I was like, well, most things worked for me in this novel. Funnily enough, talking with my book group about how steamy it was, and some people agreed with me, and it came up for the fact that actually apparently there's a lot of women who watch gay porn, and there's this misconception that men will think, oh, lesbian sex is so hot, and there's this misconception that women wouldn't find gay sex quite hot, and no, it's a thing.
It just made me question, for me, there was something slightly flat in the writing, which is interesting because at the same time as really appreciating it and enjoying it, which I did, at the same time, I just didn't feel drawn in and completely kind of captivated by this unfolding relationship. And then, yes, that relationship coming to fruition and then the parting, which I wasn't particularly moved by. And I couldn't help but wonder whether that was just my own personal lack of interest in the subject, or whether it was something in the writing that was almost distancing me.
Well, what did you think? How do you feel, Phil, about the last third and that kind of real shift to Rome and then, forward in time?
I mean, so when I first read it, I was just sort of flying through. Now I think that the whole Roman holiday is sumptuous. It's just this feast and the poets and the night that just keeps on going, and it's really magical. But it's also very different from everything else because it's sort of expanding out beyond the romance, and now it's Elio just having his full first taste of adulthood. It seems like almost 3 distinct novels. There's just this sort of the pursuit in the first act, the romance in the second act, and the third act then is him flowering into adulthood, and it's a very different thing. And it's not clear that they all necessarily work together. I think they do, but they do. It does seem like you're going into a completely new space.
It's very jarring.
Yeah.
That shift to Rome where there's other people around is quite dramatic. And then even forward in time. Because when you're reading it, you're not, from the beginning, you're not entirely sure that it is being told looking back. Because often Elio is talking in the present, but then the narrator's voice will shift a little bit and there'll be a hint that actually maybe time has passed and he's looking back. So I think he does this brilliantly, Aciman, is leave it a little bit uncertain until you get towards the very end where the narrator is looking back in time now. I think maybe in his 40s or 50s.
Well, I think time is a really interesting aspect of this book, and it's very interesting actually going to see the film, which I would never normally do, but I was curious about the film of this book. So this is a just been Oscar-nominated film that came out quite recently and did really well, lots of publicity. So I finally caught up with it the other night. And what was fascinating was the things that they chose to leave out. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about this was I felt that in addition to being this exploration of this very intense, passionate, heartfelt relationship, it was also a book about time and the passage of time and that idea of a certain emotional maturity and perspective that comes with time. And there's a significant character. This child, Vimini, appears and befriends Oliver. And in the book, every day they go down together and they sit on the rocks and there's a sort of lovely kind of companionship between them. But the point about Vimini is that she explains she has leukemia and she's very matter-of-fact about it. But it's almost like her purpose as a character is the fact that she's not going to be around very long, and she reminds all the other characters of this. And that was completely left out of the film. They didn't go there. Maybe because they felt it was too sad, maybe they felt it was too emotionally complicated, but I felt like, okay, but why did he include that character? Why was she important? To me, it was about underlining that subtle thread that runs through this about transience and beautiful things that come to an end and somehow personified in this child.
I think she also represented Oliver's world beyond Elio, that Oliver was able to have this incredible friendship with this young girl, which probably is one of the memorable experiences he had over the course of this summer. Whereas Elio is just totally infatuated with Oliver, and that's all he really thinks about. You get the sense that Oliver, Oliver, as becomes quite clear, has great affection for Elio and actually has been kind of admiring him from a distance while also trying to keep him at bay. But he's got other things going on too. He's working on his manuscript. He plays poker.
Didn't you love just this kind of sense of this intellectual, milieu? I was describing it to a friend and he's German and he said, it's European. So I was saying it's amazing. It's this mix of languages and they just slip from one to the other completely effortlessly, Italian and German and French and English. It's all completely seamless and every single thing they're reading is some amazing classical text or 15th century poetry, and there's something incredibly seductive. That was the thing that I really appreciated and loved and enjoyed reading about, because I sort of suspect that that's the author's world. I mean, when you heard him speak, do you get a sense of that?
Yeah, I think it may have been the world of his childhood. I've had a bunch of friends react more to the movie, but it's the same as the book, that this is quite a privileged world. Yeah. They have 3 or 4 household servants. They have the cook. They have her husband. I mean, there's the whole world that they live in. And I mean, it's really intoxicating and it's intellectual and there's all the languages and there's people, relatives and other professors floating in and out. But there is something... some people find it quite distasteful.
Alice in my book club called it aggressively upper middle class, which wasn't to say she didn't enjoy reading about it, but the sense of privilege, and what to expect from life and the type of people you'll meet is quite something. When his dad books the hotel in Rome, it's one of the best hotels.
He gets them the suite, doesn't he? Overlooking the Trevi Fountain or whatever it is,
Going back to what you were saying about the girl next door with leukemia, sort of giving a sense of time. The transience of the summer. I mean, from the beginning, there is this sort of 10-week period that's delimiting everything because Oliver is only there for that amount of time. And even in that first third, and one of the things I love about the first third, it felt very Proustian and very... all of the tenses were, and then we would do this, and then this would, but there was no chronology really. It was just sort of the summation of this first month, what the daily ritual was and how it might vary. And then it's only in the second act where then you start to get this chronology of how they start to actually hook up. But I loved that first third. And within it, unlike Swan's Way, where it's, it's a whole childhood, there's this sense that Elio has, even the 17-year-old Elio has, that he's working against a clock.
That these moments are charmed.
Yeah.
And he'll never get them back.
And that was very poignant. And again, I found it really surprising then when I saw the film that just seemed to have been left out, and it fairly single-mindedly focused on this relationship.
Right.
So do you feel like the film lost some of the subtleties of their relationship?
It's not so much that. I think it captured what Aciman intended about their relationship very well, but I feel like it missed some other stuff that for me felt really important about the book and made the book worthwhile. So that it wasn't just a book about effectively a crush. We've all had crushes. A crush is an amazing thing. It's kind of an amazing and terrible thing. You become completely obsessed with the way someone holds their coffee cup. And they can be very time consuming, and but this is just human. This is something that happens to humans, and I loved the way. I thought it was brilliant the way he explored that. Actually, I thought it was absolutely spot on, that intensity of focus on another individual.
And I did think that Elio seems quite convinced that no one has noticed this, and yet clearly everyone has noticed this. Just as you do, if you ever spot a workplace romance, it's really obvious as when there's suddenly
to everyone except
when there's suddenly
a
spark between two people.
The two people.
And the two people are like, but we're just talking, and it's like, no, it's really clear what's happening here.
This book is very much in Elio's head, and obviously the movie can't do that. And you're watching Elio, and I feel like Oliver is no longer the sole object of desire, whereas in the book he sort of is. But in the movie you're sort of in love with Elio too. Oh. Whereas in the book you are Elio. Right. And I don't know a way, if there would have been a way of adapting this book and keeping the interiority of Elio.
We haven't talked about the peach.
Well, I was just going to say, was anyone actually sort of slightly grossed out by it? Or was it just... there's a lot of sense of taste and smell and people kind of, sniffing someone else's underpants, or the scene with the peach, which actually even the film didn't quite go there. They couldn't quite bring themselves to have Armie Hammer eating a peach filled with semen. And just in time, Elio has a totally unscripted, if you go by the book, sobbing fit in his arms, and he doesn't have to eat the peach after all. Everyone's like, oh thank God.
But I still like those moments because it's not idealized, sex is weird. Sex is between two people, and it's weird, and it's private.
I think that's fair enough, but in which case I just felt it was just too long. It was too much. It could have been a bit shorter, I think, and would have been more effective. Well, I'm pretty sure I texted you about halfway through, and I'm like, when are they going to get on with it?
You did, yes. You did.
Can I just say one more thing about the language? This sort of Proustian comparison. I mean, he does write beautifully. There's a kind of, almost like a kind of unaffected quality to it that I really loved, and I feel like he wears his learning very lightly, and that was a real pleasure. There are books where there are sentences and you just read it and you think, oh yeah, that's so great. He's talking about when Elio and Oliver first go to a cafe, and they've been cycling there and they're hot and they're thirsty, and they grab some water in a cafe, and he says the water was insufficiently cold, not fizzy enough, leaving behind an unslaked likeness of thirst. And I thought, oh yeah, that's so good. Sometimes you have a drink on a hot day and it's just not quite enough. And then that taps into so much else that's going on at that moment. And I just loved all that. I thought that was... But then there were moments, come on, let's be fair, when it sort of tips over slightly. So there's a bit in the final third of the book where Elio's struggling to come to terms with the end of the relationship. I had nothing to fight back with, nothing to add, nothing to throw in to muddy the waters between us, nowhere to hide or run for cover. I felt as exposed as a stranded lamb on the dry, waterless plains of the Serengeti. And I was like, come on.
Wow.
Yeah, you're reaching there. I feel the editor could have saved him. Miranda, I think she quite liked the book, but she's like, he's a real three metaphor kind of guy. Like, why use one metaphor when you could have had another and then another before you conclude the sentence? To be honest, I didn't notice it because I think he writes with such pace. It kind of, the words are just bubbling out of kind of Elio's stream of consciousness. And I think some of these sentences last a whole paragraph, but you never feel bogged down.
Yeah, it never
just
feels
flow.
laboured.
Yeah.
Well, so then what did your book club make of it? Did it make for a good book club book? Sounds like it was a very good discussion book.
Yeah, a lot of discussion, a lot of, different perspectives. I think some people loved it. Other people really didn't like it at all. Thought it just went on. And there was some comments about it being a bit of a beach read. I think it was much more than that. I think that, just because it's about kind of lust and obsession doesn't mean that it has to be
There's a lot of beach in it, though.
But there
Yeah,
is a
it's
lot
a
of beach.
very-
That's true. Italy is like the third character. All the
Yeah.
heat and the
Well, in the summer.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the season is the sort of
yeah, no, that's true.
And the
And
late
then when
nights
and that
and
comes
the
to the
swimming
end
and
with
the-
what
yeah.
is it, clouds and the first rain, and he said an autumn had arrived, and
Yeah.
you can just so imagine it.
Yeah, I think it's a really good book club book.
And Phil, presumably you concur.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think I've done it in a book club, but I've certainly given it to enough people that I've discussed it over the years.
And you've now
as if
had
I
the
were-
book club experience
Exactly,
here
yes.
today with us.
Oh, I'm very happy to have discovered it and discovered André Aciman. I'd be curious to read some of his non-fiction.
Yeah, Out of Egypt's quite beautiful.
Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Kay Dunbar is the founder of the Ways with Words Literary Festival, and when she's not gathering the best authors from around the world to come and talk at her events, she gathers a group of friends for her long-standing book club. I caught up with her to find out more.
We have 3 festivals we organise, one at Dartington, which is where we live, one in Southwold and one in the Lake District.
And these
So-
have been going for quite a long time, haven't they?
Yes, the Dartington one's been going, it's a 27th festival coming up, so a long time.
And so over the years, I imagine most leading British authors people would have heard of, you've probably had come and be at your events.
We've had loads and loads of writers from people like David Owen and Terry Waite and Maureen Littman and have all been and spoken at various times on their books. So lots and lots of people, yes. Probably about 2,000 in all over the years.
And I've been at one of your festivals, and I know that the audience, in a sense, it almost feels like they're not necessarily people you know, but at the same time they feel a bit like old friends. It feels like a real community
It feels
of people.
like family. Yes, it does.
And do you get the same people coming back again and again?
Some people have been at every festival since it started. And for them it's lovely because it's like meeting old friends, and so they do get a sense of belonging.
You are also in a book club.
Yes.
And how long has your book club been going?
20 years now, yes. Probably almost as long as the festival.
And so I'm interested in how you manage your reading that you must have to do for the festivals, as well as your book club reading. Is it difficult to manage them both?
It probably isn't, because, with the book group, I do find that I need to read the books the week before, because that leads up to the book group. Otherwise, I forget the details.
I
of
find
them.
the same thing.
I had hoped there'd be more overlap, but there certainly isn't.
Is there not?
No, not much overlap.
And so tell us about your book group. How does that work?
Well, we have 18 people, and they're all people who've lectured at one time or another at Exeter University. So it tends to be a kind of meeting place for people to reunite and get together again. And 18 is far too many for a book group. It's a lot for everyone to have a say. But on the whole, particularly since people have retired, people are going abroad. They don't all attend. So it works.
How do you manage the discussions?
We meet in people's homes, and so we have a meal first. Normally it's someone introducing the book, and then everyone chips in after that.
And how do you choose them?
It tends to be in turn.
It's quite nice because then I
No.
think probably people, if you know your turn is coming up, you're going to be thinking quite hard about trying to make sure it's something really interesting, something that's going to make a really good... I think it'd be a very good way of getting the good book club books.
Yes, it's true.
Yeah. Do you keep a record of things that you've done?
They do keep a record, yes. We have a couple of people who act as secretaries. A book group we know actually vote on each book, and they give a number, a mark for each book, but we don't go that far.
Have you made any discoveries, any surprises in the course of your book group?
We've read Patrick Gale, who I really liked, and I thought I must read more of his stuff. And I must get him to the festival because he lives in Cornwall. And so to come to Dartington in Devon wouldn't be too far for him at all. So I suppose
So he was a discovery.
Yes, he was a discovery. We've had occasionally someone I know who is a writer has been to our book group, but it's a very different discussion you have then, when you've got the writer of the book present. And we had Sally Vickers, who'd written a novel which everyone read, and then she came to the book group where we discussed it. But you have to say to people beforehand, this is going to be very different.
Yes.
And it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in a way that's why Laura and I, much as we'd love to talk to authors, we would, of course we would, but at the same time we know we wouldn't be able to be as freely critical, shall we say?
No,
because you wouldn't.
You're
You would.
certainly not.
Someone there who's written the book.
You behave in a totally different way, and occasionally it works, and occasionally it's of interest to have the writer there, and they give a different perspective on natural writing too, which is quite nice.
Yes, I could see that would be. I mean, that's more in a way what you get when you go to one of your festivals. You really get to hear.
That's true.
The ideas, the inspiration.
People, yes, how they've gone about writing.
But I don't know. For me, I feel like one of the real pleasures of book group. It shouldn't be, but sometimes something comes along and you can have a very good time savaging it.
That's true. Yes.
And you wouldn't want the author to be present for that.
No, you definitely wouldn't.
Given that it seems like many of the people are coming from slightly more academic background, are they sort of quite intellectually quite fierce, your discussions?
They're quite fierce, not fierce enough for me. I quite like them to be more detailed and more fierce. And I suppose the best discussions we've had have been the ones where people have disagreed.
Kay, thank you so much for telling me about your book club.
No, that's so right.
And if people want to find
out,
out about the festivals, where can they find you?
we have a website which is www.wayswithwords.co.uk.
So have you been to one of the Ways with Words festivals?
I've been to the one that's held in November in Southwold in Suffolk, which is a fabulous place to be in the summer, but in winter is, I think it's reasonable to say, it's fairly bleak, but it really comes to life when the festival is on, and it's very convivial, and I think there is this real sense of a community of people who go back again and again to Ways of Words festivals. There's a real sense of people know each other, and it's almost, I mean, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say it's kind of on a very, very large scale, but a sort of a book club.
A sort of a book club in the sense that everyone, well, may have read the author beforehand, because I always prefer to have read an author's works before I listen to them talk about it.
I like the idea, which to her obviously seems complete common sense, but I suppose because I'm not so much of a planner, but the idea of actually warning people, oh, okay, so for the September group, it's going to be your choice. And then actually people have got more time to think ahead and think, you know, what do I really want to read? What do I really want to get the group to? I suspect that would lead to some good choices.
Yeah, I do think most people choose their books that way. I think
do you?
I think we're outliers. You know, my mum's book groups plan their choices, I think, for the whole year in the summer so that they know what they're going to read for 12 months.
I suppose that works if you have a more established group with members who really come regularly. I mean, I think the problem with yours and mine is people, you never quite know who's going to be free to come. And
I also just like, you know, the sense of suspense. That's almost the best bit when you get to choose your next book.
Yeah.
What will it be?
yeah, it is quite fun.
And I loved the fact that Kay, who seemed like a reasonably, you know, mild-mannered woman, was said, you know, oh yeah, I like it best when everyone disagrees.
Yeah.
Which is the same for me, you know.
She doesn't think they're intellectually fierce enough.
Yes, you know.
It's not actually quite as cozy
Get feisty,
as it
people.
might seem.
Inspired by Call Me By Your Name, here are some more recommendations for your next book club book. I am going to recommend The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe. That's my best German accent there. Which was first published in the late 18th century. And it's about young Werther who falls in love with Charlotte, but it's an unrequited love. And he falls into despair and despondency. It's written in letters, so he's writing these letters about this despair and despondency to a friend. And ultimately, it leads to his destruction because he simply cannot live without Charlotte. This is a classic in the sense that it was one of the first novels that kind of explored male passion and romance, and it was really instrumental in kind of shaping the romantic movement that followed thereafter. It even started a craze for all things young Werther, and it was said that there were copycat suicides because of this novel. I think it hasn't dated so well, but as a book that inspired, you know, this sense of romance, modern day romance and infatuation, it's a very good compliment to Call Me By Your Name and would make for a great book club book.
I would like to recommend a book by the author of a book lots of people might be familiar with, The Slap, by Christos Tsioklas.
I've heard of it. I've never read it.
He's an Australian author, and The Slap was a huge bestseller over there. It did well over here, and then they made it into a TV series, so I think it kind of found even more reach that way. I think he's an extraordinary writer. He's one of those people who, the second you start reading, you're completely hooked and wanting to know where he's going with it. Barracuda is a novel about a swimmer. He's training to be in the Olympics. That's his goal. He wants to win the men's freestyle, and he is coached by this tough immigrant, sort of Hungarian Australian, who's pretty hard on him. He's pretty hard on all the boys he trains. It's a novel about masculinity. It's a novel about competitiveness. It's a novel about Australia's immigrant culture, and indeed Australia, but also a coming of age story. I just thought it was really wonderful, actually. I really enjoyed it. It's very rich. There'd be a lot for a book club to dig into. I think he's a really interesting author, and I think if people haven't read The Slap and they don't know his work, this actually would be a really great book to discover him. And before he left, we got our guest Phil to give us his recommendations.
I'd actually recommend two things. I can't think of a precise book that does everything that this book is doing, but one book that I read directly because of this, you can find it online, this conversation, there's a transcript of it, between Aciman and Colm Tóibín, the Irish author, right after Colm Tóibín had come out with Mothers and Sons, and this conversation at the New York Public Library. Aciman talks about this novel, Olivia, by Dorothy Strachey, written in like 1944 or something, weirdly when she was like 80 something. It's this story about a schoolgirl at a boarding school in France, I think, who falls in love with one of the women teaching her, and it's also just about desire. And that is what Aciman cited as what he was sort of trying to do with Call Me By Your Name. So it's an interesting counterpoint to that. The other book, just in terms of gay love stories, which I'm not sure I'm comfortable calling this one that, but there's this book, At Swim 2 Boys, from like 15 years ago by another Irish author called Jamie O'Neill, which was his one book, I think. And then he's just gone into, I think he just took the revenues and is living in a shack somewhere. But that's an amazing book, and it's set in 1916 or something. So it sort of counterposes the relationship between these two teenage boys with the revolution. And it's a really amazing read.
That's it for now. If you'd like to see what we're up to between episodes, follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Book Club Review Podcast, on Twitter at Book Club Review Pod, that's Book Club RVW Pod, or you can always email us at thebookclubreview@gmail.com. And if you're not already, why not subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts.
Books mentioned in this episode were The Sorrows of Young Werther by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Barracuda by Christos Tsioklas, and Phil recommended Olivia by Dorothy Strachey and At Swim 2 Boys by Jamie O'Neill. Kay Dunbar mentioned author Patrick Gale, whose latest book is A Place Called Winter. Find out more about the Ways with Words Festival at their website wayswithwords.co.uk. And if you keep listening, you'll hear our extra bit at the end, where we get into Fire and Fury by Michael Wolff, This Is Going to Hurt by Adam Kay, Hot Milk by Deborah Levy, and Ursula Le Guin's Earthsea novels. Our excerpt from Call Me By Your Name was read by Sam Alexander.
On our next episode, we'll be discussing Dr. Fisher of Geneva by Graham Greene. But for now, thanks for listening and happy reading. Very nice.
Wasn't one of my best, actually. Slightly out of tune.
What have you been reading?
I read the Michael Wolff Fire and Fury book.
Ah, I've been listening.
Yeah. Who reads
While
it?
painting.
Does he read it?
No, I don't know. Some generic American man with that slightly New Yorker voice. You don't actually meet any Americans who sound like this, but there's this sort of like, audible narrator voice. Yeah, I don't know.
See, I almost never listen to audiobooks, so I can't. But
they're great for when you're doing chores, for driving, for chores.
All my chores involve small children, and so I'm not able, unfortunately, to tune them out.
To focus on something else. Fair enough. So my colleagues were saying to me, they're like, oh, well, why are you reading that? Hasn't Michael Wolff really been discredited? And there's some things that people refute and details he got wrong. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm sure that's true. But for me, he paints like a bigger picture of the White House and its operations that is more than the sum of its parts. And I found it incredible. It did feel very different, this portrait of how things are working in the White House. And, you know, even just from the beginning, I was like, like I got a context to help me understand Trump's run for president.
Yeah, I mean, my take on it was kind of like, you know, an evil West Wing, you know, the Aaron Sorkin series.
Yeah.
And, you know, in the West Wing, you had this cast of characters who you got to know really well. You got to know their jobs, their sort of responsibilities. And then every episode would be the kind of interplay between them as they tried to resolve a certain issue. And the Wolff book is basically structured in exactly that way. You've got this cast of characters. Every chapter, there's kind of a sort of thing that's going on, and it's how they all dealt with it. I mean, the obvious difference being that every main character is someone that you hate. And instead of all kind of working together to try and resolve problems productively, in fact, they all hate each other. and all their energy just seems to go into kind of power struggles and try to undermine each other, and then going off. And it's very plausible to me that actually they would go off and complain, you know, bitterly to Michael Wolff about, you know, what the other guy just said, or, you know, some policy meeting they'd had where the next thing you know, Kushner said, no, what are you talking about? We didn't agree that. Whatever.
I've heard
just in terms of human relations or interrelations, it did all sound quite plausible when you've got a bunch of people who are not particularly bright or competent.
Well, and weirdly, who have never done the job before, so who don't understand that sometimes bureaucracy and systems and roles and responsibilities are there for a reason. You can't just make this stuff up as you go along.
Yeah, and at the same time, it's, you know, it's not without any nuance. I mean, I think you do, almost despite yourself, start feeling a little bit sympathetic, even as you sort of loathe them all. You know, because the guy in charge is
yeah.
You know, like everyone's worst boss you could possibly imagine working for. It's sort of capricious, and and he sort of hates everyone who works for him, and just divisive. No one ever gets rewarded or praised. It's always this constant, relentless stream of, again, all of that, I'm afraid, sounded quite plausible to me.
Oh, totally. No, exactly. That's what I mean. You know, you can't judge a book like that by like little anecdotes. So I think it's a really good read. I've kind of paused. It's one of those things I feel like you don't have to just rush right through. You can go back and forth.
I found it kind of horribly compulsive, and I did really, you know, race through it. But at the same time, I was sort of horrified by it, and it did give me nightmares. Actually, towards the end of it, I had this
of nuclear Armageddon.
No, more kind of prosaic than that. I dreamt that I was sort of trapped in a room with Trump, and he was just shouting at me, like in the dream. He was just shouting at me and shouting at me. I woke up, I was like, oh God.
You're like, that's enough.
Got to stop reading the Wolff book. Mercifully it ended.
Good. So what did you read next as a real palate cleanser?
I then moved on to a book called This Is Going to Hurt by an ex-NHS doctor, now TV scriptwriter, called Adam Kay. And he's a very good writer, and it's very, very sharp and funny, and details his experience training and then working as a junior doctor and sort of, you know, working up through the ranks in the NHS. I had read that it was good. It made this sort of Sunday Times bestseller list. I was curious to know if it would make a good book club book, and it's very funny, but at the same time, it's deeply troubling. And I think for that reason, it would be an excellent book club book if, I have to say, you've got the stomach for it. It's quite...
Is there blood?
There's a lot of blood.
Yeah, I don't like blood.
Yeah, there's a lot of fluids in general.
No, none of that.
And I think if you are squeamish, you would find it. He doesn't. It's never sort of. He never doesn't dwell on it, but it's just very much a matter of fact. That's what doctors do. I think you get the impression that, you know.
Dysfunctional bodies. No.
Spend a lot of time with it up to their elbows in various forms of viscera.
Oh God! So this is what you read next. Anything nice?
Yeah. So it wasn't. Perhaps it was troubling in a different way. But I did actually conclude at the end. I did think it would make a good book club book. So I think if your group is up for something and they're not particularly squeamish, I would really recommend it. I thought it was great.
Have you read Hot Milk?
Yes, I liked Hot Milk.
I liked Hot Milk.
That'd be a good book to read in the middle of winter.
It was. I read it in a very rainy Seattle, and kind of this desert heat is like permeates every page. I thought it was brilliant, really kind of uncanny and strange, and the relationships between people are very odd and slightly surreal.
It's because what I thought she did very well was it's sort of set in a Spanish beach town, isn't it? But it's not in any way an idyllic, happy-go-lucky beach holiday.
No.
There are jellyfish in the water that will sting you the
man
second
of
you go in
wars
there.
are everywhere, and there's this sense of kind of grime and dirt. It's not a glamorous Spanish seaside town. It's kind of the worst of the lot.
Yeah.
It talks a lot about parking lots.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a bit bleak, and it's about this young woman who's in, who's gone down there because her mother is seeking treatment at a private clinic. I thought it was so fantastic, and then I went on holiday with my friends, and said to my friend Stephen, "This is really good. I loved it." And he read like the first few chapters, and I was like, "Really, Laura?" And I was like, "Do you no, you don't like it?" And he's like, "Hot milk, more like hot mess." And I was like, "Oh no, but that is true. Like, she is a hot mess. Like, her life's falling apart." But for me, that was kind of part of the appeal, is that I thought they did a very good job of showing a young woman in crisis.
Yeah.
And for very good reasons.
And exploring the mother-daughter dynamic.
Exactly. And her own kind of, separating herself from that relationship. I thought it was really good. I think it'd be an excellent book club book.
I agree, actually. I suspect because it already seems like quite a divisive read.
Yeah.
And I've talked to people who, didn't get on with it.
Yeah.
It would probably make for some very good debate.
My next book I'm going to read is Station 11.
Oh, yeah,
Have you read
that's
that?
good. I have read bits of it through sort of half-closed eyes. I find contemporary apocalypse novels quite hard to read. I mean, as in it's actually actively a kind of genre that I avoid, just because I spend so much time worrying about apocalypses, and the prospect of them happening at any minute. But the bits of it I did read, I could tell she's a really good writer. There are some really interesting ideas in there. It's about culture and memory and what gets carried forward and what gets preserved, and that's really, really interesting.
And I saw, I had posted on Instagram I was going to be reading this, and then I saw someone else had said it's actually not very bleak as far as dystopian novels go.
It's true.
And I was like,
it's a sort
okay,
of virus.
good.
And yeah, she doesn't.
So lots of people die, but then we move
I
on.
can tell, yeah, because it's about the generation that sort of follows on. So yeah. Just as a final aside, I just started reading the Earthsea Quartet by Ursula Le Guin, which you gave me for Christmas.
Or what, by coincidence?
Total coincidence. I started it a couple of nights ago and immediately had that lovely feeling of being back in those safe hands.
Yeah.
I think The Left Hand of Darkness, when we did that was the first time I'd ever read anything by her.
She's good.
She's really good.
She's really good.
And so yeah, I'm just as promised. I am enjoying it.
I think that if she hadn't written fantasy and sci-fi, with those things being looked down on as genre fiction, I think she would have won big literary awards. Like, her writing is excellent.
Yeah.
And kind of her approach and ambition and the ideas and the characterization. Yeah, I need to read more Le Guin.